welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that's pretty interesting to me, at least. You know, BioWare's Dragon Age, the Veilguard is already hitting the PlayStation Plus Essential tier, and it's like barely been 4 months since it launched. I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
We've got this article from VGC, breaking down the news, and we're going to kind of try to figure out, what this move might tell us about how the game's doing and maybe even what's going on over at BioWare.
Yeah, what's really crazy is just how quickly this all happened. Like, think back just a few years ago, seeing a huge AAA title land on a service like PlayStation Plus this soon after release was like practically unheard of.
Right. It's kind of like walking into a used bookstore and finding like a first edition, still in print bestseller just sitting on the shelf,
Yeah.
The VGC article really highlights how Dragon Age, the Veilguard, was supposed to be this, big comeback moment for BioWare. I think they were going all in on it after some of their other recent releases, Didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah, and that context is super important here.
Right.
This wasn't just any release for BioWare. They were banking on the Veilguard to reassert themselves as a leader in the RPG world. So seeing it on PlayStation Plus so soon after launch definitely raises some questions.
Yeah, okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The VGC article mentions that EA initially projected a certain number of players for the Veilguard, but the actual figures were almost half of what they expected. They reported around 1.5 million players engaged in the first 2 months.
Yeah, and 1.5 million players might seem like a lot on the surface, but to give you some perspective, their last Dragon Age game, Inquisition, sold over 3 million copies in its first month alone.
Wow, okay. Yeah, that definitely puts things into perspective. It makes you wonder if those, less than stellar sales figures could be a factor in this PlayStation Plus move.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility. Publishers are constantly evaluating their strategies, especially in a rapidly changing market like the gaming industry.
Yeah, and it's not just about the sales numbers, right? The VGC article also included their review of Dragon Age, the Veilguard, and they gave it a 3 out of 5. They even said, and I'm quoting here, has great characters, but gameplay stuck in the past. Ouch.
Oof, yeah. Reviews, especially from well-regarded sources like VGC, can have a major impact on whether someone decides to buy a game. Think about it. You're scrolling through game reviews trying to decide what to play next. A lukewarm or negative review can definitely influence your choice.
For sure. I know. I definitely pay attention to those reviews, especially for a big game like Dragon Age where I'm going to be sinking a lot of hours in. So it seems like these less than glowing reviews could have played a part in the Veilguard not performing as well as EA might have hoped.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure, but it's certainly a factor worth considering. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. The gaming landscape is shifting. Subscription services like PlayStation Plus are becoming increasingly popular, and publishers are having to adapt their strategies accordingly.
All right, so we've got this maybe not so great sales performance, potentially compounded by some middling reviews. Let's add another layer to this. Remember back in January when there was news about BioWare downsizing?
Yes, I recall that. VGC actually covered that as well.
Yeah.
They quoted BioWare's general manager, Gary McKay, as saying that their upcoming Mass Effect title doesn't require the full studio support during its current phase of development. Now combine that with what we're seeing with the Veilguard, and it starts to paint a very interesting picture.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm connecting the dots correctly. You're suggesting that the way the Veilguard performed, or maybe didn't perform, could be a reason why BioWare is scaling back on their Mass Effect development.
It's speculative, but it's a question worth asking. Could the reception of the Veilguard have factored into their decision to streamline development on Mass Effect? It definitely makes you think.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, about the pressures these big studios like BioWare are facing, especially when it comes to these huge RPGs that take so much time and money to create.
Absolutely. Developing a sprawling RPG like Dragon Age is a massive undertaking. It requires, years of development time, huge teams of talented people, and a significant financial investment.
Yeah, and if the game doesn't perform as well as expected, it's easy to see how that could have ripple effects throughout the studio, impacting decisions about future projects and, resource allocation.
For sure. It's a high-stakes game, and the landscape is changing rapidly. Look at how quickly things have evolved just in the past few years. We've seen the rise of these subscription services like PlayStation Plus, which are becoming increasingly popular among gamers.
Right, and you also have these free-to-play games like Fortnite and Destiny that have just exploded in popularity. They're constantly being updated with new content and events, which keeps players engaged for years.
Precisely. These live service models have proven to be incredibly successful, both in terms of player engagement and revenue generation. and it's forcing the industry to rethink traditional models of game development and release.
So you're saying that this whole situation with Dragon Age, the Veilguard, might be a symptom of this larger shift that's happening in the gaming industry.
It's certainly possible. We're seeing a move away from the traditional model of releasing a big budget game and then moving on to the next project.
Yeah.
Publishers are looking for ways to extend the lifespan of their games to keep players engaged and spending money for longer periods of time.
Right, and that's where these live service models and subscription services come in, right?
Exactly. They offer a way to keep players invested in a game world for months or even years after its initial release.
But what does that mean for a studio like BioWare that's known for creating these big narrative-driven RPGs?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
They have this incredible legacy of crafting these immersive, story-rich experiences that players absolutely love. Games like Mass Effect, Baldur's Gate, the original Dragon Age trilogy. These are all iconic games that defined a generation of RPGs.
I mean, I still remember spending countless hours exploring the world of Dragon Age Origins. That game just sucked me in, and I think that's what so many people love about BioWare games. That feeling of being transported to another world, of getting lost in these incredible stories.
Right. That's their strength.
Yeah.
They excel at crafting compelling narratives, building believable characters, and creating worlds that feel rich and lived in. But the question is, can they adapt that approach to this new landscape where live service models and subscription services are becoming increasingly dominant?
Right. It's almost like they're at a crossroads. They have this amazing legacy, but they also need to evolve and adapt to survive in this rapidly changing industry. Do you think they can pull it off?
I think they have the talent and the creative vision to do it, but it will require them to be bold, to be willing to experiment, and to perhaps rethink some of their long-held assumptions about how RPGs are made and delivered.
Okay, so let's talk about those assumptions. What are some of the ways that BioWare might need to shake things up in order to stay relevant in this new gaming landscape?
Well, one area where they might need to adapt is their approach to storytelling. Traditionally, BioWare games have been very linear in their narrative structure. You follow a set path, you make choices that influence the story, but ultimately you're moving towards a predetermined ending.
Which works great for a single-player RPG where you're really invested in that one playthrough. But in a live service model where the game world is constantly evolving, that approach might not be as effective.
Exactly. They might need to think about how to create stories that are more modular, that can branch out in multiple directions and adapt to the choices players make.
Kind of like how games like Destiny and Fortnite are constantly adding new missions, storylines, and events that keep players coming back for more.
Precisely. They're creating these ongoing narratives that unfold over time, and players feel like they're part of a constantly evolving world.
So maybe BioWare could take some cues from those games and find ways to integrate those kinds of live service elements into their RPGs. But wouldn't that be a pretty significant departure from their traditional style?
It would, but that's the nature of evolution, isn't it? To survive and thrive, you have to be willing to adapt. And I think BioWare has the creative talent to find a way to blend those live service elements with their signature storytelling and world building.
Yeah, it's almost like they're standing on the edge of this uncharted territory. They've got this rich history and this incredible fan base, but they also have to navigate this rapidly changing industry.
And that's what makes their next steps so fascinating.
Yeah.
They're at a pivotal moment, and the decisions they make will have major implications not just for their own future, but potentially for the RPG genre as a whole. Do they stick to their traditional approach and try to weather the storm? Or do they embrace these new trends and try to shape the future of RPGs?
It really does feel like we're at this turning point, not just for BioWare, but for RPGs in general. You know, it makes me think about all the talented developers and writers, the artists and musicians who pour their hearts into creating these incredible worlds and stories. What does this shift mean for them?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think a lot of people in the industry are grappling with right now. If this move towards live service models and evolving narratives becomes the norm, it could open up a whole new world of creative possibilities. Imagine RPGs that continue to grow and change for years after their initial release, with new characters, storylines, and even entire continents being added over time.
Wow, that sounds incredible, almost like these living, breathing worlds that we get to be a part of for years. But I also wonder if there's a risk of losing something in that transition, you know?
Yeah, I see what you mean. There's a certain magic to those classic single-player RPGs where you get completely absorbed in a self-contained story. There's a sense of completeness and closure that you might not get in a game that's constantly evolving.
Right, it's like the difference between reading a finished novel and reading a serialized story that's still being written. Both can be incredibly engaging, but they offer different kinds of experiences.
Exactly. And I think there's room for both types of RPGs to coexist and thrive. You might have these big, sprawling, live service games that offer hundreds of hours of gameplay, and then you might also have these smaller, more intimate single-player RPGs that focus on delivering a tightly crafted narrative experience.
Right, it's almost like different flavors of RPGs for different tastes. And as gamers, we're lucky to have so much variety to choose from.
Absolutely. And I think that diversity is only going to increase in the coming years as developers continue to experiment with new ideas and push the boundaries of what an RPG can be.
You know, this whole conversation has really got me thinking. It's easy to get caught up in the news cycle, the sales figures, and the industry trends. But at the end of the day, it's the passion and creativity of the developers that make these games so special.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The heart of any great RPG is the people who poured their hearts and souls into creating it. And no matter how the industry evolves, I believe that passion will always find a way to shine through.
Yeah, it's like a reminder that even in the midst of all this talk about business models and market forces, the real magic of gaming comes from the human connection, the shared experience of exploring these amazing virtual worlds together.
Beautifully said. And
Yeah.
that's something worth celebrating, isn't it?
Absolutely. So to all the developers out there who are pushing the boundaries of RPGs, thank you for your hard work, your dedication, and your creativity. We can't wait to see what incredible worlds you create next.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Dragon Age, BioWare, and the ever-evolving landscape of RPGs. We hope you found this conversation as thought-provoking as we did.
Until next time, keep those controllers charged, keep exploring those virtual worlds, and keep those imaginations firing.
And remember, the future of RPGs is still being written. Who knows, maybe you'll be the one to write the next chapter.